6th meeting of the Charlotte City Council Budget and Effectiveness Committee. We'll start with introductions in the room. With you,
Kelly Flannery, CFO.
Ed Driggs, Committee Chair.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Lena James, Deputy City Attorney.
And would committee members online please identify themselves?
Dimple Najmira, committee member.
Julie Eisel, committee member.
Renee Johnson, District 4 Committee Member.
Thank you. I think Mr. Graham may join us. We have 3 items on the agenda today. With any luck, we'll be able to get through them with reasonable dispatch, and if so, we'll just end the meeting early. Why not? So let me hand over immediately to Ms. Flannery, who is going to give us some good news about the financial audit report.
I am. Thank you.
I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
Can't ever say that enough. So I'm here today to present the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or what we like to call the CAFR, for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020. You should have received yesterday, and I think it was circulated again today, an electronic copy of the document. There is hard copies that have been bound that are going out in your weekly packets, I think, tomorrow. Obviously, there's a lot of material in there, and I don't expect you to have read it all, but if you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out. And just a reminder, the CAFR and the budget book are really the 2 most important documents that the city produces annually. Where the budget looks forward and plans for the future year, the CAFR looks backwards and tracks the actual financial activities of the city. The CAFR is a set of financial statements that meet the accounting requirements established by the Government Accounting Standards Board. I know when you read the document, it looks very regimented, and that is because we are required to follow those GASB standards. So if there's any information you want that you don't think is in there, it's probably there in a format that makes no sense. So please always ask. We'll find a way to make it easier to read. Joining me today is Daniel Gordy. He's with the city's external audit firm, Cherry Bekaert. Dan is a director with Cherry Bekaert and has been a CPA for 14 years in public accounting, and he's served as senior manager and director in the city's audit for the past 4 years. Dan provides a variety of audit and accounting services to all sizes of governments and nonprofits, including many types of financial statement audits and attestation services, internal control analysis, and trainings. Dan's also a frequent speaker on uniform grant guidance and recently issued GASBs. He serves as engagement director on over 50 local governments and nonprofits throughout the Southeast. And before I turn over to Dan, if you'll just let me indulge it there for a second, I just want to thank the financial reporting team, Cherry Bekaert, all of the citywide department accounting and finance teams. Due to the hard work of this team, I'm going to steal my thunder back. We have a clear CAFR, no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies. We did this in a year where we got $155 million in CARES funding, with the guidance being determined as we were spending the money. We did this in a time where we didn't have access to work papers, and we did it all within the guideline afforded by the local government commission. So the state treasurer was generous and gave everyone an extension, and we didn't need it. So we did it all on time, we did it all clean, and we did it all with a lot more hands. So I just want to thank everyone, and with that, I will turn it over to Dan.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, Dan, go ahead.
Well, thank you for the opportunity here to speak to you about this. This is, like Kelly had mentioned, this is kind of a backward looking at the year that was and making sure that the information that is presented in the financial statements that you're using for future years in terms of how you make your decisions is accurate and correct. Today, I'm going to go over with you a few items, our role as the external auditor, to remind you of that role, the key highlights, which are a little bit more detailed, but overall clean opinions that Kelly had mentioned, and then internal controls and significant audit areas, and then leave some time for any questions that you may have that I may not have covered. So going to the next slide here, we go into our role as the external auditor. So we perform our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, and that's in order to provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement and fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. In addition to generally accepted auditing standards, we also perform our audit in accordance with with government auditing standards and issue what's also known as a Yellow Book report. It is management's responsibility to prepare and present the financial statements in accordance with GAAP, and is our responsibility to then express an opinion on those financial statements. At the conclusion of an audit, we are required to communicate to those in charge of governance, and usually that is done through our letter, formerly known as a SAS 114 letter, that you should also have received. But we also will do that as part of this presentation, go over those key elements from that letter. So on this next slide here, we have the actual results of the audit. So from an opinion standpoint, we provide 4 opinions for the city. We provide an opinion on the financial statements themselves, over internal controls over financial reporting, which is again also known as the Yellow Book report, that is done in accordance with government auditing standards. And then we issue a federal and a state single audit opinion. In terms of all 4 opinions, I am happy to say that we issued a clean, unmodified opinion. And this is the highest opinion that we can give under our standards. We had no items that we considered to be a material weakness or a significant deficiency in internal controls that we considered to be a finding, and no compliance findings either as part of our government audit. In terms of the single audit programs, the programs that we audit are audited on a rotated basis based on the amount of spending in each of those programs. The programs selected for testing this year were the Community Development Block Grant, the Coronavirus Relief Funds, which again, Kelly had mentioned earlier, the large sum of money that we received from the federal government as part of the CARES Act. We tested the money that was spent through June 30th at that time. And then we also tested the Republican National Convention Grant, Federal Transit Cluster, POW bill, and was known as a State Maintenance Assistance Program. The last 2, the POW bill and State Maintenance Assistance Program, are state programs, while the rest are federal, and Federal Transit has a piece of federal and a state match included. In terms of these, the audit of the single audit, we had no single audit findings that we were to report in our compliance section. And then going on to the required communications that I mentioned earlier, there were no significant policies or changes in policies for accounting pronouncements in the current year. While the city has had a multitude of GASBs that have been implemented over the last 4 or 5 years, this was an off year in terms of not having to implement any new GASBs. That also was credited by the GASB delaying a number of their standards in May due to the coronavirus. And so there will be implementation of a new standard next year, but we don't expect it to be have a significant impact on the city. In terms of our estimates, throughout our audit, we rely on estimates provided by management and test those estimates and test the key factors and key numbers and factors that are used to evaluate it. And so one of a number of those things are the allowance for doubtful accounts on your receivables, depreciation of your fixed assets, the other post-employment benefits, also known as OPEB, that is based on actuarial valuations, as well as your pensions, one from the state, which is a cost-sharing plan, the local government employee retirement system, and then also the law enforcement special separation allowance, which is a single employer plan that the city has. We also look at the estimates related to your claims for workers' compensation and health insurance, and then also lastly, your derivatives that you have remaining. We are also required to communicate to you any adjusting entries we have to the financial statements as part of our audit, and then as well as any entries that we may propose and then pass on. So I'm happy to say that we had no entries that were required to be adjusted in the financial statements. We did have 2 entries that we did propose and management had passed on, and we agreed with management's decision to pass on those that related mainly to the grant accruals. which if you remember from the prior year, we did have a finding on not on the financial statements last year that we considered to be a material weakness in your grant accrual system. That system has been improved upon and corrected. And due to that correction and due to the implementation of the controls in place, there was additional items that were found. Those items were not considered material, so financial statements that required us to adjust them, and we were agreeing with management on the passing of those entries. Move to the next slide. Now, one of the bigger parts of our audit is looking at the internal controls. With the size of the city and size of all governments that we audit, it's impossible to review every 100% of transactions in any audit. It's not possible. So what we do is we do a hard look at your internal controls to make sure that the controls are in place such that they would allow for a proper recording of the transactions that occur during the year. Those transactions that we're looking at are what we consider to be significant transaction cycles to the city. And those significant transaction cycles include your receipt process, your payroll process, and your disbursement process. We obtain an understanding of the controls in place. We've also obtained an understanding to make sure that the information from initiation to ultimately being presented into your general ledger and then into the financial statements flows through, and we can walk through the whole entire transaction cycle to ensure that the information is being reported accurately. We walk through any of the key controls to make sure that those controls are working and are being utilized during the year for each transaction. And then we test internal controls in terms of looking at a sample of items and testing to make sure those controls are being worked on based on our sample. In terms of journal entries, we are required every year to test journal entries, any manual journal entries that are posted by management, to ensure they're for a proper business purpose and being properly approved. We obtain a data dump of all entries that are recorded during the year. We then siphon out any entries that are automatic and leave just the manual entries, and then apply certain risk factors that lead to more riskier entries, such as maybe entries that are posted on the weekend, an account that's infrequently used, and a poster that maybe doesn't post as frequently as others. And then from that listing, we take a sample and do a test of that. And from our testing, we noted that there was no issues with any of the journal entries not being for a proper business purpose. And then none of the journal entries as well were not approved. They were approved by appropriate individuals throughout the process. From an information communication standpoint, we gain an understanding of your IT general computer controls as it relates to the programs and functions that are critical in drafting your financial statements. This is a high-level review of the city's IT functions in which we are comparing best practices in the industry to what the city is doing. This is also a part where we emphasize to management throughout the audit process that the importance of good controls around IT, especially surrounding employee training, to help mitigate the risks of being a victim to a phishing scam, which many governments have been a victim to. Go to the next slide here. What we have here is the significant audit areas for our testing. As you'll see here, a lot of this mirrors up with the items I spoke about just before on the significant transaction cycles. As you can see, receivables, revenues, payables, and payroll. But we're also taking a close look at your long-term debt, including pensions and OPEB, and then obviously your cash and investment balances to make sure they're properly reconciled and exist and are fairly valued at year end. We do this testing through a multitude of tests, which include confirmation. We are confirming your larger grants during the year. We're also using analytics, predictive analytics, namely on your revenue sources for your enterprise funds to make sure that, for example, your water sewer revenue makes sense based on consumption and price of water by the gallon. And then we're looking at also we're doing tests of details. A test of details is mainly being done in your single audit section when we're testing the grant expenditures for all the single audits. But we're also doing tests of details for certain revenue accounts, such as the airport, and then also subsequent receipt and subsequent disbursement testing for your grants and your normal disbursements in accounts payable. Go to the next slide here. So as just in summary here, clean opinion, no adjusting journal entries, good internal controls, no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that were identified, and full cooperation from management. And so I do just want to echo what Kelly said in that this year has been like no other, like many have said before. And we all had to work to do this audit 100% remotely. And we have been doing the audit, maybe I would say 40, 50% remotely in the past. So going up to 100 was quite a task, but everyone at the city did a great job of being able to give our requests, have Teams meeting, have these face-to-face through these WebEx meetings to talk through issues and go through things. And so we really appreciate all of their efforts, especially Betty Matos and Kelly and Teresa Smith. We really enjoyed working with the city over these years, and I think everything went really good for this audit this year. And like Kelly said, a lot of governments took advantage of the LGC pushing out the date to January 31st and issuing sometime in November or December, and the city was able to get everything in short order completed and to our sufficient for us to give an opinion on October 31st, like every other year. So with that, the next slide, I will just turn it over to any questions that anyone may have about what I presented.
Are there any questions from the committee? Ms. Ajmira.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Gray. Well, it's great to hear that even in the challenging year, we have clean audit, no material weakness, and no adjusting. So a great job to the team, both external and our internal teams. I just have a couple of questions. Daniel, in your scope for the external audit, does that include our firefighters' retirement plan?
Yes, so we audit the firefighters' retirement plan. Actually, we issue a separate report, and we provide it to their board of trustees as well. So that is part of our scope of our audit.
Got it. And how long you have been the auditors for the city, external auditor?
I believe we've been for at least 10 years. It may be 15 by now, but I have been on this engagement for the last 4 years. So
I understand. So I guess this might be a question for our committee. I know after certain years, or we usually try to get a different auditor and we put an RFP out there. So I don't know what the time frame is for that, but I think that's something a committee can discuss. But other than that, I have no other questions. Again, great job, and thanks so much.
thank you.
Sure, thanks, Councilman. Just to follow up on your procurement question around the audit, for the audit services, we utilize the statewide audit contract. And there's no way to say this without offending Cherry Beckert, but the pool isn't that large. So we do go through a process, we do pick frequently. I think where we get comfortable with utilizing the same firm is the fact that Dan mentioned is that the principal rotates in and out. So prior to Dan, we had another gentleman. We've had Dan for the last 4 years. So I think we're comfortable with the process, but if you have any ideas on how to attract more firms to participate in that North Carolina pool, we'd be interested in that as well.
Up on that, Kelly. So is there a rotation requirement in terms of the external audit firm, not just the principal or the partner?
The GFOA recommendation is every 5 to 7 years to make the change. And
Right.
candidly, we've tried to do that. There's just not interest from the big 5 or however many are left at this point to participate in North Carolina. It's one of the challenges of being a AAA city and a AAA state is we are afforded the opportunity to not have to pay people a lot of money to provide us services. So the big firms don't really want to work with us because we can get services, because frankly, our audits are clean and they're easier than, say, a Chicago or New York. So it's the burden of the unburdened, really.
Right, and I think your review already in practice, I mean, I feel pretty comfortable. And we are seeing the rotation in the partners. I mean, I don't have any objections. I was trying to understand if there was a GASB requirement, but looks like we've done our part in putting the request out there and asked for really other made their bid. So thanks so much.
Any other questions? So I would just like to say, when I see an audit result like this, my inclination is just take it and run. Fabulous. And I hope the community recognizes what this really signifies. It's kind of a dry subject, but to have somebody scrub our finances like this and come back and basically attest to the integrity of our processes and the validity of our report, it should be a significant source of confidence in the community. And I think in conjunction with our AAA debt rating, we can pride ourselves on being responsibly managed. And I would like to add to Ms. Flannery's acknowledgement of all of the other people involved in this. Special congratulations to you for getting this done so well this year and achieving this fantastic result. So thank you very much. Okay? And Cherry Becker, thank you too. This was not an easy project, and we are grateful to have your availability to provide this service to us. I've worked with Cherry Becker in a number of other situations on boards and things, and your service has been uniformly excellent. So thank you for another good year. And even though Ms. Ajmera does raise valid questions about the issue of replacing the auditors, if we find that we have to stick with one auditor, as Ms. Flannery suggested, I'm very happy that it's this one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and if there's nothing further on the audit, let's move to our next agenda item. The ethics policy. You'll recall that we voted at our last meeting, I think, to basically recommend to full council a couple of changes to our ethics policy. And if our attorneys will permit me to kind of paraphrase in lay terms, what we did for one is we strengthened the requirement that a council member who has any concerns about an ethics issue must discuss those concerns with the city attorney and is bound to act on the recommendation of the city attorney, which is a difference from the way we worded that particular provision before. We then also changed the procedure when a complaint is filed so that the city attorney, instead of only making a narrow determination as to whether the complaint is kind of technically properly submitted, can further make a prima facie determination as to whether the complaint has substance or merit. And the goal of that was to avoid situation where obviously unsubstantial complaints were then referred to the outside, incurring expense and generating the kind of media suggestion that there was an investigation going on. So I think we created a useful escape valve for ourselves and empowered the city attorney. But what happened after we voted on those actions was that, based on further conversations, a couple of clarifications are now being proposed by council that relate to, I think, both of those items, and in particular, a closer definition of what prima facie means, and therefore what the scope is of the determination that would be made by the city attorney. And I believe also, Ms. James, you said that there was a modification to the language about the referral to the obligation of council members to talk to the attorney. So if you would go through the language for us, I hope that was a good description of what we're doing.
That was perfect, and I'll try to laser focus in on exactly that. I don't know if it's easier, we can either go to slide 9, or if folks, committee members, have the copy of the draft document, the Word document, the ethics policy itself, it's on page 3 there. So essentially, Part A, Section 3B,
I'm sorry. Mr. Chair,
Yes.
my blank. I don't know if the rest of the committee has the attachments. Can those be resent to us as we're getting started?
Hey, Ms. Johnson, I did resend them. Are you not receiving emails?
I'm receiving emails.
Okay, let me figure out why they're not, because Lauren sent them and then I just sent them about 30 minutes ago. Hold on, let me
Can you
check.
send it to Toya,
Okay.
please? Thanks.
Okay, so Ms. James, go ahead.
okay, thank you. So if you're looking at, and it's on the screen, page 9 of the slide, what we wanted to clarify and have the committee members focus on for purposes of really clarification more than anything today is to look at the additional language that has been added to Section 3B, which has to do with, as Councilmember Driggs said, the question of if there is a perceived conflict, the process for that. And one of the questions that came up was to make it clear that the obligation to seek that advice from the city attorney falls on the council member, not on the city or city staff or the contractor or a subcontractor that a council member may be affiliated with. So we simply added that phrase to the second to the last sentence, that it's the requirement of the council member, and added an additional sentence there to make it clear. And then I can move on to the next section. Then if you
I
go,
would just say about, why don't we take these one at a time? In my mind, this is an abundance of caution, if you will, because I believe the intent was actually pretty well understood. So I hope that everybody accepts that this is merely a clarification and not a meaningful addition to what we've already talked about.
exactly. So everything that you see on that document, on the Word document that's in blue and in red, was previously approved. The only new language is what is highlighted in yellow. Everything else was unanimously approved, I should note. The next section is to Part D of the policy, which again gets to the complaints, the review, and sanctions. Again, everything in that section, Section 1, there's a newly written Section 2, and then Section 3 is the original sanctions section. Everything that appears in blue and red on the Word document and that's summarized on slide 9 was previously approved. The only language and the clarifications we've added that are new are in yellow. And the first yellow highlight was simply to italicize the prima facie Latin word so that it was clear to folks. It simply means on its face. How does something appear on its face? And so based on some conversations that committee members had with Patrick after the last meeting, we wanted to add some additional language to make it clear on what types of situations might constitute the prima facie allegation. And that gets back to this additional language about connections with contractors and subcontractors. It also adds specifically misappropriation of city resources, criminal or fraudulent activity, or any other activity constituting harassment or sexual harassment as those terms are commonly defined. And that last piece was added because I think it came up as a question from one of the committee members the last time. And just to be clear, the city does have a harassment policy and council has a policy, but it's a policy that applies to council members and city employees. It doesn't cover the scope of a member of the public or somebody else made an allegation. So there's no policy that covers that. So to the extent something like that was raised, then certainly that could get into this kind of a complaint process and the city attorney would look at it for that analysis. And then if you look at section 2A, the proposed new language that's again highlighted in 2A is simply to add that the and 1B language. And then in section 2B, and I'm sorry that this is so lawyerly, but I think some of these words matter, and I have to make a correction there. In 2B, the new highlight should actually say on the second line either 1A or and 1B instead of 1A or 1B. But we can make those edits. And
So, Ms. James, are you saying that both have to be met? It's not a question of whether either is met, they both have to be met.
correct.
All right, thank
And
you.
that's assuming that you adopt this language in section 1B.
Right, it's part of
which
the
is
whole
right,
proposed
contingent on that.
framework, yeah.
Exactly. And so that goes to 2A, 2B. I think there was something that we had overlooked the last time around. I'm sorry, it should also be 1A and B again in the rest of section 2B. And then in 2C, again, we added 1A and 1B, given the new addition of this prima facie allegation definition. And I think you caught Mr. Driggs last time that we should have substituted the word outside counsel in there.
Yeah,
That we
yeah.
didn't catch. And I think 2D has just some minor edits, again, ands versus ors. That's the extent of it. So that's, in a nutshell, the clarifications that we're proposing, and I think if you take action on those and approve it, then I think you have a better policy overall to refer to the full council.
Thank you, Ms. James. Are there any questions from the committee? Ms. Ajmera?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have not been able to review the attachments that were sent just 30 minutes ago. So I'm trying to review the PowerPoint slide and the attachments that were sent at the same time. So I'm trying to get my bearings straight here. So a couple of questions under number 2 here on the slide. Any harassment, could you just elaborate on that? And what does that include?
Could I just make a comment before you reply to that? I think just for context, okay, the general purpose here is the acknowledgement that prima facie is a Latin expression that may not be self-explanatory to everybody. So the language that's inserted is meant to kind of demonstrate the intent, but note that it says may include but is not limited to. So we are actually only trying to describe in general terms what those things are so that people don't read prima facie and have no idea what that means. I think that's kind of the purpose here. So if you look at these things, and by all means proceed with your questions, but I'm just saying that the idea behind this was simply to, having adopted this standard, that the city attorney can actually go a little further in deciding whether to refer to the outside. We're looking a little closer at what that means. Anyway, sorry, go ahead and state your question.
Yes, so did you understand my question, Mr. Attorney?
I think you asked about the harassment language in particular.
Yes.
And I think, and Patrick, feel free to jump in, I think what we were thinking was, I think you had, Councilwoman Ajmera, raised the question in the past about harassment and the harassment policy, and because the policy, again, doesn't cover harassment, if there was an allegation of harassment made by a member of the public against a council member, the existing policies don't cover that. The Code of Ethics doesn't cover it, and the existing council harassment policy doesn't cover that. It only covers it with respect to council members and city employees. So here, the intent was to think through, harassment could be somebody who gets constant texts, phone calls, any kind of harassing situation. There are certain criminal definitions of harassment, and then there's certainly, in the context of other situations, sexual harassment. So we made the language broad enough to say, if it is anything that constitutes harassment or sexual harassment, as those terms are commonly defined under law, that might be sufficient to constitute a prima facie allegation.
Got it. Okay, that explains. All right, I don't have any other questions. So again, just to confirm, these are just the examples. It's not limited to 1, 2, 3, 5 of these things. Is that correct?
That's the intent, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right, got it. Thank you.
So this is really just a little afterthought on the action that we already took. And if there are no other questions, can I have a motion from this committee that we adopt these amendments?
So moved. Iselt.
Second? Is there no second?
Second.
All right, then let's proceed with a vote. Ms. Isolt,
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira,
Oh, I'm not ready yet, just because I've not been able to review the attachments that were sent 30 minutes ago. So I want to get comfortable with the language that was sent to us in an email. So I'll review that, and then I will be more comfortable adopting it afterwards. I don't have any objections as of right now, but again, I don't want to rush into something that I don't fully understand.
understood, and I appreciate that situation. But at the moment, we do have a motion and a second, and so for the purposes of the roll call vote, do you wish to be recorded as a no?
Sure, well, if I only have yes or no option, then at this point, I'll vote no.
All right. Mr. Graham, are you on the call?
Yes.
What is your vote, please?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson, are you on the call?
Yeah, I wasn't able to review them either. And this is very, very important information. So we didn't receive it. But I'm not prepared to vote yes either. So I guess the answer is no.
Well, I'm a yes, so we do have a majority. It's unfortunate that we were not able to achieve unanimity, I think, based on just the timing. And therefore, I hope that we will treat this as having been passed by the committee, but will continue to entertain any comments from the two members that didn't feel that they had enough time to consider these things. I'm very hopeful that when you look at them closely, you'll realize that they just represent improvements to the essence of what we'd already agreed. So,
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Ashmira, we will make ourselves available to you, and I'm sorry you didn't get that information beforehand, but we'll make ourselves available to discuss any matters with you, both together or individually if you'd like.
Thank you.
So, Ms. James, thank you for your very detailed work on this. I think we've come away with something that is robust and will work effectively in practice. Our third agenda item is the recommendations of the task force governance, Citizens Group on Governance. And I think for that one, I will turn over to the city attorney.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we have the presentation. Do we have the presentation now? Okay. So today, I just want to, and you've seen a lot of these slides already in the presentation that came from the committee and then part of the discussion that we had on Monday. But we do have the recommendations from the Citizen Advisory Committee on Governance. And if you go to slide 3, I trust everyone has access to the PowerPoint. We've listed all of the proposed recommendations and the actions that would need to be approved by the City Council. I do want to add clarity to this issue of
The slides are coming, but let's just carry on.
I do want to bring your attention to this issue of the term limits. What we did at the committee level was we put into 2 boxes things that council could do versus things that needed a conversation with the General Assembly. The issue on term limits is not only a conversation with the General Assembly, but agreement with the General Assembly to put a referendum on the ballot to make a change to the Constitution to allow term limits based on case law that's out there that appears to suggest that there are very few limitations on eligibility to run for office, and term limits is not one of those. Since it's codified in the Constitution, the case law basically says that what's in the Constitution are the only limitations on running for elected office in North Carolina. So any other limitations on running for office need to be a part of the Constitution and would require a constitutional amendment. But you see there, we've got the 4-year terms, staggered elections, the term limit piece, The move to the nonpartisan elections, you're in a partisan primary and election process right now. They didn't specify which of the three brands of nonpartisan, so you'll just have to take up the issue, I guess the first issue of whether or not you want to move to nonpartisan, and then we can talk about the various issues, the various methods of nonpartisan elections. There's the adding the 8th district representative and removing an at-large representative. They did not make a suggestion to change the size of the council. There was a recommendation to increase the mayor and council compensation, and then updating the policy guidelines regarding restructuring, redistricting, which is something that you do every 10 years based on information that comes from the census. It has been my understanding that the results from the census for the larger communities will be delayed substantially. I haven't gotten the final update on what that looks like, but it appears, at least based on the information that I received, that we may not get that information for several months, and probably not in time to make any changes to the 2021 election. But if I get information, or for some reason they're able to get that information out to us quicker, I'll certainly let you know. We go to the next slide. And you see these are, again, the bases for the recommendations, which I think have all been provided to you. If there's any particular recommendation that you'd like to go over with me specifically, we're able to do that. Otherwise, I think we can just continue to scroll through the PowerPoint presentation. I would like for you all to take a look at the presentation when you get a chance, because this information will be presented at your, it's not a strategy session. Summit. I don't know why I can't remember Summit. Next week, where we will be discussing these recommendations coming from the Pinnacle, yes. The Pinnacle meeting of the year. I like it. As we continue through the, if we go down to slide 9. This sets forth the process for the change of government and what the council would have to do if you wanted to make a change in the form of government that you have, in terms of adopting resolutions, and that's if you wanted to do it by council vote. Obviously, if you wanted to do it by a referendum, that would be simply moving that to the Board of Elections for placement on the, and that's the next slide, placing that on the November 2nd general election. And you see there, late May to June, you'd issue or you pass a resolution of intent, publish a notice of hearing, adopting an ordinance, and then that sets forth the process and procedure by which the referendum item would be on the November 2nd general election if you decided to go that route. If you could, next slide, please. That was the slide that I just read. If we can go one more slide. And what we've tried to do here is to actually set forth the timeline for pushing these changes out to a community referendum, if that's what you decided to do, just so you could see over the course of a basic timeline. These items will be discussed at the annual summit next week. Please review the PowerPoint, and if you have any questions or concerns, please let us know. But this is all the information that's been provided to you in the past reports, but happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Do we have any questions? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Baker. I just wanted to make one comment on the recommendations for the purposes of the retreat or summit or whatever we want to call it. I'd like to be able to break out the recommendation for your terms, to have a recommendation for the office of the mayor to be 4 years, and then a recommendation for the office of city council to be 4 years. So that's not saying that's what I'm recommending. I'm just saying give us the option to discuss it separately so that if there's not appetite for the whole council to go for 4 years, we could at least have the discussion as to whether the 15th largest city should have a mayor that runs every 2 years.
Will do.
Thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes, we received an email from Councilmember Winston, and he raised that the idea that term limits might be unconstitutional per North Carolina law. Patrick, can you speak to that?
Yes, and this was what I had referenced, and I'm sorry, we didn't have the slide up, but all the way back on slide 3, what I had referenced, and what it says is term limits would require approval of the General Assembly, which is the first step of it. It would be the General Assembly that would have to put term limits on a referendum, and it would be a constitutional amendment. So yes, the Constitution would have to be amended, and we would have to have agreement from the General Assembly to put the amendment on the ballot for the voters to consider.
Would that require a supermajority vote for a constitutional amendment?
I believe that's the case.
So I hope, Ms. Johnson, you saw that I did reply to Mr. Winston. And I think what we're doing here in committee is, for one, we recognize that most of these issues are going to be decided by the full council. So it's not, we don't have a whole lot of latitude in this group to try to dispose on any of these things. But I would just, for one, Mr. Attorney, would this slideshow be included in the summit? Like, would these slides be presented at the summit?
Yes.
And therefore, I guess the question to the committee is, do we feel that these slides constitute a good basis for a full council discussion? Does anybody have any suggestions about modifications to the slides?
Well, I do have a follow-up question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So you said this today, and you also said this last week, that the committee doesn't have a lot of latitude on these recommendations. So I just want clarification on the process, because if the majority of us, if we took a vote to look at the recommendations to move them to full council, wouldn't that be our decision? And as you stated last week, we don't have to consider these in a wholesale approach. We can dissect this as we see, as we vote to accept or dissect or filter. So I would go from a committee perspective, what are you saying that our role is today? To leave it, or can we discuss moving this forward?
I think we have latitude within this group to talk about that, and you're right, I need to clarify. I was going to go on to say, if this committee, for example, wanted to recommend to full council that pursuing a constitutional amendment did not seem like a winning strategy in our judgment, that's something that we could agree to include in our report out. Do we think that trying to stay on a timeline that would cause changes that we make to be effective this year, that might be a question on which we could make a recommendation. I think you recall from the public hearing that almost all of the comments we heard were on the specific subject of partisan elections. And the interesting thing there was that the comments that we had were all opposed to nonpartisan elections, and yet the chair of the citizens group said that the great majority of municipalities actually do have nonpartisan local elections. So does this committee want to make a recommendation to full council about that? I think we can absolutely entertain any suggestions from committee members about things that we as a group might want to recommend to the full council. So if you have one, let's hear it.
The first thing I think we've heard from the public, I think our current status in Mecklenburg County that reflects like what our constituents, the makeup between Democratic and Republican. So my suggestion would be to remove the nonpartisan election. My suggestion would also be to remove the term limits, uphill or losing fast, want practical. recommendations that are going to improve the council. And yeah, yeah, that would be my suggestion, to remove partisanship and the term limits. And we can discuss, I mean, I would also say the removal of the at-large seat and adding a district seat. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So I would just say what we will need to do eventually is arrive at a motion proposing recommendations from this committee, and I want to hear if any other member has other recommendations.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines as well, that given the nature of the report itself coming from the task force, and given the nature of the interest that all the council members will have in reference to this, I think it's good for the committee to kind of process it. But I would be, I'll vote for an amendment, but I think we're going to have the same discussion again next week on all of these things. And so maybe we should just kind of let it go forward as published and have a discussion with the council as a whole. Just a thought.
So, Councilman Graham, that was kind of my point when I said I feel that these issues are probably going to have to be resolved by the full council, so we can go in and suggest anything we want. The same conversation is going to take place again among the whole group, and that will decide. So, and that was the only reason. I mean, we all can take our opinions with us to the full council. I thought what we might do, though, is, as I suggested, just agree or not agree that this particular presentation of the report that we got and the exposition of the issues was something we felt was a good basis for a council conversation. And I don't know that we have to vote on that. This appears in our agenda as an information item, but I would just encourage people to look at it now, or if you need to look at it after this meeting, and let's at least be kind of clear that we think this is the right way to explain and discuss, including the clarifications about the constitutional amendment or about the timeline and other things that are in there. And then I really do feel that the ultimate discussion is going to have to take place among all of us in full session. So I don't know, Ms. Johnson, would you like to make a motion, and we'll just see whether that gets the support from the committee, or how would you like to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I had a comment I wanted to make.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I would rather just bring this to the full council to talk about, because we haven't talked about it. And there's some, one of the speakers brought up the fact that there shouldn't be another district, but I'm not sure the council has had that conversation. I'm not a district rep, but I would love to hear from my district rep, my colleagues who are district reps, their experience of representing on average 110,000 constituents. That's double the average for, and this is data coming from the work that the group did, which we haven't even gone into, but that's double the average of a district rep for a city our size. The reason they made a recommendation of taking an at-large seat away, that's just a recommendation of one way to accomplish getting another district seat. And so that conversation just has to be had. We can't have more than 12 council seats by state law. And so you can't just, and the goal would be to keep it an uneven number of seats so that you're not relying on the mayor's vote to break a tie. But I just think it's important for people to have that conversation. I'm not giving an opinion. I'm just, wondering what colleagues feel about it. And I'd like to have the district representatives share their experience with representing the effectiveness of trying to represent that many people.
And my personal preference would be to hear the responses from the full council before even staking out a position myself on some of these things, which again is why I thought maybe we should just make sure that we have a good exposition and explanation of what the recommendations are and what some of the issues are related to potentially following up on them. But certainly 110,000 is a large number, and I expect that the district people in the districts that have very high levels of rezoning activity would be grateful if they saw that burden distributed a little more widely. For example, there are a lot of angles here, though, and again, I think we go forward. My personal view is that tackling the constitutional amendment for term limits is a dead end, and I think Mr. Winston raised that point. So, you know, we can obviously individually or as a committee go back and suggest that that is really a recommendation that's not especially actionable that we got. For the rest of it, there are just all kinds of perspectives, and we're not going to hear them all until we're in full session.
And I agree with that. And obviously, I kind of knew that before Mr. Winston sent it out, that was going to be problematic. But going back to the question about the size of the districts, you know, you're right. You can reduce the size of the district by adding a council member, but you can really also support the council member at the current size by having additional staff to support the members, which is another way of kind of being responsive, effective, and efficient. I mean, we're a large city, and we share one person among 3 council members, and really have no staff to do research, do anything, writing. I mean, it's just a wide variety of things, and so we need to ask ourselves clearly. We keep quoting the fact that we're the 15th largest city in the country, but at times we don't act like it based on how we are organized and how we function and by the things that we do administratively.
And Mr. Graham, before your current service on council, we did actually have a pretty robust conversation about the levels of staff support. And I think this committee in particular, as the Budget Committee, is in a good position to consider what our investment is. I wouldn't want to conflate that with our response to the recommendations, because I think if we feel that the recommendations are good policy, then we will take such action as is necessary to support changes that we make. But a very valid point, and one that I've heard before.
Yeah, you can argue it both ways, Mr. Chairman, in reference to, since we're just talking, if I had my desire, I would consolidate and take care of all of this, right? Because we're really just kind of knocking on the door, right? If we really want to restructure government, if we really want to reorganize how we do things. I mean, we deal with the homeless indirectly. The county does it directly. We're doing affordable housing. They're doing affordable housing. We're doing economic development. They're doing economic development. I mean, you know, if we really, really want to reimagine government in general, and specifically the city council, I would take a larger staff, but that was not the task force charge, and I understand that, but just throwing it out there.
And as I'm sure you're aware, Mayor Fox promoted that and spent some time talking to the towns and so on about the implication of consolidating county and city government. Did not encounter a lot of enthusiasm at that time. So although the advantages are, the potential advantages are clear, there are some issues about governance, about the role of Charlotte in the consolidated government. I remember talking to Harry Jones when he was the county manager about consolidation, and he thought that the efficiencies, the financial efficiencies that could be realized from consolidation were not more than $4 or $5 million a year. He didn't think that that was a driver. There's clearly the potential to rationalize, though, a lot of our policies and consolidate decisions that are now being made separately. So I think we can bring that up in the context of, you know, our general reimagination of local government, but it is not, in fact, among the recommendations from the advisory group. So,
yeah. Like I said, it was not their charge. Clearly understand it, nor would consolidation be an easy thing to do, but I think we're just kicking the ball down down the road. Maybe me and Anthony are ahead of our time. I'm not sure.
Well, I appreciate your vision. I suggest you just roll it out on the floor when we're on this subject in full session, and we'll see what kind of a reaction we get from that.
Oh,
So-
I know what the action's going to be, Mr. Chairman.
You'll certainly scare the daylights out of some of the mayors of the towns.
Well, I'd just like to say that I agree with Mr. Graham on that, and I think there's capital projects that absolutely would have saved millions of dollars, if not operating projects. So I'm with you, Mr. Graham. I would like to make a motion that we just remove the topic of term limits, since we don't have the ability. We could discuss it all we want, but we don't have the ability to act on that. So
I'll second that.
All right, so the motion is that this committee recommends to full council that we not pursue the subject of term limits. Is there any discussion?
Yes, I have a discussion.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
If we're removing items, then can we remove the nonpartisanship as well? Is there a
So-
reason?
So you'd like to make a substitute motion or an
Yeah.
amendment to the motion that would add the nonpartisan elections, would include removing the nonpartisan or recommending to full council that we not consider nonpartisan elections. Do I have a second to the amendment?
Along with the,
Along with the term limits, yes.
I will second that, Mr. Driggs, but can we also add, adding a district representative, can we also include that in Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson, are you comfortable including that as well?
yes.
But now we're doing what we said we weren't going to do.
yeah,
I mean, well, I was willing to discuss it at full council, but if we're dissecting it, there's
Let's
that
go ahead, yeah.
nonpartisanship.
well, just
Well,
to get
the only
back to my motion, I made the motion for things that we can't do anything about. I think if a citizen committee made these recommendations, then it's only fair that the whole council has the opportunity to talk about them, instead of people pulling things out that they don't like. We can't do anything about term limits, so that's why I made the motion specifically for term limits.
So, Mr. Attorney, can we consider an amendment to the amendment? Or do we have to act on the proposed amendment?
Yeah, at some point, maybe you'll have to vote that down and then bring back an amendment, yes.
I mean, our status right now is that we have a motion, we have an amendment to the motion, and then we have a second amendment to the motion. So
If-
can I
if
call
you're-
for
yeah.
a second to the second amendment?
If
Or-
the original maker of the motion is willing to accept those amendments, then you can still stay in one motion.
So it doesn't sound like the original maker of the motion is in agreement with those amendments. Is that right, Mayor Pro Tem?
Right, I have my motion stand.
So does that apply to both of the proposed amendments?
I'm actually at a loss of how many amendments are out there, but there
Yeah.
there
I mean,
should
we
be.
had- The original motion was that this committee recommend to full council that we not pursue term limits.
Right.
Then the amendment was proposed that we also recommend to the full council that we not consider nonpartisan elections. And then there was a further suggestion that we not consider adding a district.
And the
So
maker
I'm
of
just
the-
trying to figure out procedurally how this committee,
And as I understand it, the maker of the motion has not accepted those additional amendments.
all right, so then we need to act on the original motion.
Correct.
And then if somebody else wants to make a motion, I guess they can, right?
Yes,
But-
if somebody
but-
wanted to make a substitute
So
motion.
what we need to do now, barring further discussion, is just vote on the motion, the initial motion as proposed by the maker, which is that we recommend to full council that term limits not be considered further in our deliberations about the recommendations from the Citizens Advisory Committee. And I will now do the roll call. So Ms. Isold,
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira,
Yes.
Mr. Graham,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well, so that passes. I would recommend that you just make the point that you're making about these other issues in the full forum, because I really don't think we're going to get a useful reaction to those, given the diversity of opinion on those topics. a useful reference here. And as the Mayor Pro Tem pointed out, it's pretty easy to suggest that we not pursue a course that looks almost impossible. The rest of the stuff is debatable, frankly.
It's all debatable. I mean, if it was impossible, I mean, we could certainly, when you first presented it, you said it would go to the state legislator, and it would take a supermajority. So it's not impossible. It's just harder. So I'm uncomfortable in the fact that I felt like I made a substitute motion that it wasn't addressed. And we are dissecting as some members see fit. I feel very strongly about the nonpartisanship.
So Ms. Johnson, I don't see any reason why you can't now make a motion that says that, that we will not recommend the nonpartisan thing, and let the committee think about that separately. It's just they were stacked up before, and that wasn't the right way to do it.
Okay. So I'd like to make a motion that we remove the nonpartisanship elections and the and the additional member.
The additional district.
Yes.
I second that.
All right, so we have a motion and a second that this committee recommends to full council that we not consider further the issue of nonpartisan elections or of adding a district. And is there any further discussion? Hearing none.
I have to.
Yes, sorry.
I'm going to vote against it, right? And I'm on record already as opposing nonpartisan election. I just don't agree with it at all. I'm really don't like adding an additional council member, but I think it is worthy of a full council discussion. And the previous act that we just made was constitutionally, we can't do it, right? So that's why we kind of removed that from the table. The others, certainly we can do it or we not do it. So I think I would like to have that conversation with the entire council. So for that reason and that reason only, I'm voting against the motion.
And Mr. Graham, I'm with you. I just would not want this committee to exclude that topic or to suggest that we should exclude that topic entirely without prejudice to the vote that we might take later. So I think anybody who wants to may say no here and would not be expected then to take one position or another when the full discussion comes. In any case, are there any further comments from the committee?
Yes, I have a comment. Again, I had asked about the budget impact when it comes to compensation increase. So I think it would be premature for us to have a discussion on something where we don't even know the budget impact and what does that mean for our operating budget. So I hope that our staff is prepared to do that presentation if it comes up. Otherwise, we should not be moving it forward if the staff is not prepared to talk to us about the budget impact.
I think if the council decided that it was appropriate as a matter of sort of policy or in comparison to other cities to adjust council's compensation, that would then become part of our budget conversation. So that would then be a recommendation to the manager. And I would point out that if we adopted a recommendation to increase council's pay by 30%, just as a for instance, that, given that our entire payroll is $300,000 to $400,000 a year collectively, that's a $100,000 a year item. So I think in budget terms, this is actually not a big issue. I think the real question about this is just the community perception and what views are about the basis on which we serve, and what the appropriate compensation is for the service we provide. I don't think we're going to find that there's a money constraint in the end. But you're absolutely right. It would have to be this subject to a budget process, which this group is ideally situated to oversee. Where are we right now? We're waiting for another vote?
Yeah, so I think we're still in
We had
discussion.
a motion
A motion and a second, and we're in the discussion stage.
we're in the discussion phase, so are there any further comments? Ms. Jackson? All right, hearing none. Ms. Isolt?
No.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
No,
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
And for the reasons I mentioned, I'm a no, so that fails 3-2. By all means, make your point in the full session, though, Ms. Johnson. This does not conclude that conversation.
and I'll put in yes to take it away next week. Okay, so.
And Mr. Diggs, I just want to say that is.
You
my-
voted yes. Would you say, Mr. Graham?
No, I'm a no. Yeah.
No, I was saying that next week when we have the discussion about partisan election, I'll be with you.
Okay.
Yes, and that's the point. There's nothing that precludes that about feeling that it's not appropriate in this forum to try and resolve that issue.
And I look,
I just say that I also feel like, my vote was strictly to be able to have the full council talk about the issues that we had the ability to make decisions on. Whatever way it goes is fine. But on the issue of term limits, we don't have that ability to make that decision. That's the only reason, just for efficiency's sake, to take that out. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so that is the end of our agenda. Do we have a date for our next meeting? I think I saw that one was put on the calendar for the
26?
26. And has everybody on the committee agreed? Yeah, it says down here, the 26.
Oh.
Are we all in agreement that that date works for our next meeting? Here, no objection. I assume it means it does. And is there any other business or any other comment anybody would like to make? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Second, Isel.
All in favor, hang up.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Good discussion.